Hello everybody, Chess Coach Tendai here. Today I'm going to talk about how the pieces move in chess. I'm going to focus on the most important piece in chess, that is the king. The king may move one square in any direction so long as no piece is blocking its path. Okay, let's do that again. The king may move one square in any direction so long as no piece is blocking its path. Okay. So this king is on e4. And before we get deep into this session, we always make sure that we've got white square on the right on the board, which is h1. White square on the right. Okay. The king may move one square in any direction so long as no piece is blocking its path. So this king on e4 can move to f4, which is a square away, f5, a square away, e5, a square away, d5, a square away, d4, a square away, d3, a square away, e3, a square away, and f3, a square away. That king can move to any of those squares we have just put kings on. Okay, so that's a square in any direction as long as no piece is blocking its path. Okay, I'm going to remove those kings and we're going to do a recap. We said you can move to f4, you can move to f5, e5, d5, d4, d3, e3, and f3. It can move to any of those squares because the king can only move one square in any direction. Okay, now let's do something here. Can this king on e4 move to a square on g4, that square where I've just put the king? No, it cannot, because that's two squares away. It can only move one square in any direction. Can this king move to e2? No, again, because that's two squares away. But this king could move to f4, like we said before. It can move to e3, can also move to f3, d3, d4, d5, e5, and f5. Okay, so that's a square in any direction so long as no piece is blocking its path. Okay, so let's remove those kings because we only have one king in this game. Now, how about capture? The king can capture in any direction. Okay, let's work with a pawn. Let's say we've got a pawn on f4. This king can capture that. So it can just capture. The captured piece is replaced by the capturing piece. It's that simple. Okay, let's go back. What if the pawn was on e3 instead? Yes, the king can also capture that. So the king can move there. What if, go back to the initial position, what if this piece is here on d4 instead? The king can also capture that. There we go. Now, the king may move one square in any direction as long as it's not blocked in its path. What if there is a pawn on g4? Can this king capture the pawn? I'll give you a moment. No, it cannot. That pawn is too far. This king cannot capture that pawn. Okay. What if the pawn is on e5? Can that king capture the pawn? Yes, it can. There we go. Let's go back. What if the pawn was on e6? Can this king capture the pawn? No, it cannot. That pawn is too far. Okay. So let's recap the session and the lesson. This king may move one square in any direction so long as no piece is blocking its path. So in terms of possible moves, this king can move to all these squares that I've just populated with other kings. That king on e4 can move to all those squares. Let's remove those kings. And we spoke about capture. Said if there is a pawn there and it's a square away, the king can capture that pawn. Okay. So that's it on the king. The king being the most important piece in chess. If your king is in check and there's nowhere to go, that is checkmate. Now, let's talk about something else related to the king as well. The king may not move onto a square occupied by one of its pieces, where it is checked by an enemy piece or adjacent to the enemy king. Let's go into detail here. The king may not move onto a square occupied by one of his pieces. So let's say there is a pawn on f4 right next to the king. This king cannot occupy the same square as the pawn on f4. That square is blocked. If it were a black pawn like this king definitely could capture that pawn. But now, because it's a pawn of the same color, the king cannot move from e4 to f4. Okay. Let's go to the second issue we mentioned, where it is checked by an enemy piece. Okay, so this is a bit tricky because we haven't discussed how the other pieces move. So I'll only touch on this briefly. Let's imagine that there is, I'm going to put a queen here. Let's put a black queen here. Because the queen moves vertically and horizontally and diagonally, this black queen is covering, threatening all those squares. The white king cannot move to any of those squares that I've just put the black queens on, because those squares, it would put itself under attack. So the king cannot go into the line of fire. Okay. Let me just do that. Once again, the king may not move to a square where it will be checked by an enemy piece. So this king can move to that square, so it can move to f5, e5, we have just put the king now, can move to d5, can move to d4, d3, can move to f3, but it cannot move to those squares which I have left blank here. Okay, I'm just going to show you which squares I mean. That square, it cannot move to that square or that square because those squares are under attack by the queen on h6. Okay, of course this position is illegal, but this, for the sake of illustration, I'm just showing you the squares it cannot move to. Okay. Just removing the pieces now. Then, very important rule in chess. A king may not move to a square where it will be next to the enemy king. So let's say the enemy king is on g4. The white king may not move to this square, to the square f4. So you cannot have this situation in chess. The kings can never be next to each other like this. That would be illegal. So it means this king, neither king can move to the square f4 because both kings may not be adjacent to each other, may not be next to each other. Okay. I hope you can remember that. Well, that's it for this session. See you in the next one. Cheers.